Hi, I'm Ted Berger,
I'm Asya Berger.
and we're re-recording a talk we gave for the 50th anniversary of the Block Association. I think we gave it in
February 9th, I think.
February 9th, not sure. Okay.
Well,
Okay. So let me start. We're really grateful to the Block Association and to Ginger Leaf in particular, who's our great neighborhood resource, for asking us to talk a bit about the early years of the Block Association. We also want to thank Bob Aronson, Nancy Groper, and Caitlin Hawk for their technical help in preparing and helping us show some pictures for this talk. Thinking about these years is somewhat like starting a Proustian journey. It's like eating the Madeleine and remembering things past. It's hard to believe it's been 50 years since a founding group had the smarts and vision to get the Block Association going. Please forgive us if as we reminisce, we haven't given equal time to 102nd Street, 103rd Street, and West End Avenue. We suspect we've thought a bit more about 103rd Street because that's where we live. Forgive us as well if we don't mention all the people and the events we know we should. And we apologize if we get any facts and names wrong. After all, we're not historians, and at this stage in our lives, we're lucky we remembered to show up today. We also regret we'll probably be reading too much, but my technical skills leave much to be desired, and I couldn't figure out how to turn the computer into a teleprompter. Also, we apologize for the quality of many of our very old photographs. I'm not much of a photographer either. As Asya and I thought about all the years on these streets where we've been fortunate to live so long, we've been flooded with memories of some of the dearest people we've ever known. To us, this trip down memory lane is not only the story of these streets, it's the story of people and how people can affect change, and most especially, how our friendships turn to love and will be forever with us. We've lived on 103rd Street for nearly 57 years. Right after we were married, we moved to 103rd Street in the fall of 1964. First renting at 305, then in 1971, we moved next door to 303, renting first the ground floor through. Then when we purchased the building with another couple in 74, we created the duplex where we still live with our current upstairs neighbors, Peter Frishoff and Casey Rice, who in 1982 brought their share from our original partners. As you may know, Peter and Casey have worked hard on the 103rd Street Open Street project and the recent terrific celebration of Earth Day.
When we lived at 305, one day we were fortunate to meet a neighbor, our beloved Donna Levine, who lived with her husband Mel in the floor through next door where we now live. Little did we know then, on the day we met Donna, how our lives would forever change, how her friendly hello destined us to become family. Donna and Mel had moved to the block a few years earlier when he attended Columbia's journalism school. He then became a producer on the Today Show. Donna soon introduced us to another couple in the neighborhood, Len and Sherry Tredanari, who had moved to the block in 1954 with their two children, Adriana and Gregory. A few years later, they bought the brownstone at 307 West 103rd Street.
Here's a picture of Len, Asya, Donna, Sherry, and me and our snow friend. And, oh, sorry. Hmm. I'm sorry. Um, here's, so should I now just continue?
Yes.
Okay, so here's another picture of all of us together. This is this is our son, Jonathan, when he was a baby, Len, Asya, Sherry, Donna, and Mel Levine.
We all became very close friends. Ted and I were a bit younger than the four of them, and we all really connected. Len and Sherry seemed to know everyone in the neighborhood. They had been involved in an earlier effort with neighbors to get a playground built in Riverside Park between 104th and 105th Street. They understood the need for do-it-yourself, grassroots organizing and advocacy if you wanted to effect change in the neighborhood in those days.
If you know anything about the history of New York City in the 60s and 70s, you may know that the West Side was very different from what it has become. The setting for the musical West Side Story is where Lincoln Center is now. What is formerly known as the Lincoln Square neighborhood was formerly San Juan Hill. This is a picture of West 63rd Street. And I'm going to show you some pictures of the construction of Lincoln Center in that neighborhood, because it was an urban renewal project spearheaded by Robert Moses. So here's deconstruction taking place. And here's construction starting. Right here, you can see what was Avery Fisher Hall, Philharmonic, and now the Geffen Hall. And here's the State Theater. I refuse to call it the Coke Theater, sorry. Under construction. When I was a graduate student at Columbia in those days, the park at 72nd and Broadway was known as Needle Park. You may have even heard of the film Panic in Needle Park. The Upper West Side had a reputation of being more like the Wild West when it came to safety. Many blocks and buildings were astoundingly beautiful and very stable. Others somewhat dicey. However, it was also very affordable. Our first apartment in the Brownstone 303 was $110 a month. 102nd and 103rd were really beautiful streets, tree-lined, anchored by large apartment buildings at the corners, such as the well-known landmark Masters Apartments and the Candela buildings at 865 and 875 West End. Brownstones were in between. Many, like our row of brownstones where we live, built in 1895. The subway and park were nearby. We all knew we lived in a special neighborhood, yet we were also aware that we were in the midst of an economically challenged city at the time, with growing crime, racial tensions, and an increasing decline in the general quality of life. But we really loved the neighborhood. Now, technically, Asya and I were not actual founders of the Block Association. Before we became involved, a few neighborhood veterans started meeting and decided if the neighborhood was going to thrive, the formation of a block association was needed. And so in 1971, the 102nd, 103rd Street Block Association came into being. This is a picture that we took from the archives of the first newsletter from May 20th, 1975. This was the block, 1971. And it reads, because it's hard for you to read, from small beginnings, great things grow. little more than an idea 2 months ago, the 102nd, 103rd Street Block Association has become a reality. Originally planned to meet the common need and interests of the people living between Broadway and Riverside Drive and West End Avenue, between 102nd and 103rd Street, the association's steering committee voted to include the 102nd Street. The interest expressed by the residents of 102nd Street have certainly been overwhelming, and pooling our resources will certainly strengthen the association. Existing committees at that time were the Social Committee, the Ecology Committee, Safety, Housing, General Membership, and the first co-chairs were Carol Goldstein and Ed Warner. We found this article in the archives of the Block Association newsletters. So we just want to take a moment to mention how the Block Association's continuing publication of the newsletter has been so vital to our overall sense of community all these years. We salute all the editors and writers throughout the years who've kept up the communication, letting us know what we need to know about each other and our blocks. We especially want to thank our present newsletter group, now spearheaded by Hetty Campbell.
But back to the start. One of the newly formed Block Association's first victories came in the fall, 1971, when 11 new trash baskets were placed on all the street corners. Of course, chains had to be attached to discourage stealing. Because of the common concerns about safety, one of the Block Association's primary goals was to raise money to hire a security guard for the area. Similarly, in those years, much effort went into raising money to get better lighting in the area. I highlight some events in these early years which brought attention to our blocks and became cornerstones of some of our present activities. A few years after the Block Association started, a prime strategy emerged to both bring people together and to raise money for the Block Association's commitment to the guard service, the development of our first ever block party. In those days, block parties and street fairs were not as common as they are now. After a number of block parties were held, a group of us decided we needed to make an even greater impact. We were determined that our block parties should be something people would remember. We recall forming a planning committee of the Block Association, including Lennon Sherry Tredanari, Ginger Leaf, Janice Erdmode, Joe Hussey, John and Liz Berseth, Edna Goodtag, Gertrude Ellis, and the two of us.
So our basement of our brownstone served as kind of headquarters for a lot of the organizing of the block party. And here's a picture of Sherry, and who led us in this process, Len and Asya. Here's more sign painting with Len, Sherry, and Edna Goodtag. And here's Len continuing to work. Organizing these block parties became a great community building event, spearheaded by board members with other neighbors volunteering as we needed more help. We met frequently to deal with the many details of the event. As I said, our basement served as headquarters. Week after week, we created booths, painted signs under Sherry's artistic expertise. We joked and laughed and always shared a glass or two or three of homemade red wine Len Trenari joyfully made in the cellar of their house at 307. Indeed, one of the most successful booths at every block party in those days was the annual one in front of the Tread's house. Using multiple grills, we grilled many, many Italian sausages with peppers and onions on rolls. And as an extra bonus, you could sample some Tread Red, Of course, this probably wasn't legal. So naturally, there were always very long lines waiting, and we brought in a lot of money.
One of our block's major cultural assets at that time was the Equity Library Theater, ELT, a showcase for acting and theater talent located in the auditorium of the Masters Institute since 1961 through its final season in 1989. In fact, one of our son's first jobs was as an usher at the theater when he was 7 or 8. The Block Association began a collaboration with ELT for the next few years as we developed our block parties. One year, we focused on the block party on celebrating George and Ira Gershwin, who lived on 103rd Street near Riverside. ELT organized an array of talent throughout the day to sing and play a great range of Gershwin songs. The block drew a large crowd. People loved it. We were a hit, and we made money too. The Block Association's reputation started to grow for both people in the immediate neighborhood and for people in the surrounding area.
So here are some pictures from various block parties from 77 to 86. This is a Main Street sign. We had pony rides and raffles and something for everyone. Just neighbors gathered from all over talking to each other. Here's Len slicing watermelon. And this is the Trednari Food Center that I mentioned earlier. And where we served grilled sweet and hot Italian sausages, peppers, onions, and vino. This is Len at the grill. This is I talking to a neighbor. And this is Lisbeth Seth and Edna Guttag at the White Elephant table. This is our street guard at the time. This is Joe Hussey from 102nd Street. And this is Eames Saarinen, who used to live at the Masters. People just gathered, young and old, and kids all came. And I think this is Liz and John's, Liz and John Burseth's daughter, one of them. This is Elliot Shapiro, who was serving as MC. And we had, I don't remember what year it was, but it was a host of hula dancers entertaining. The crowd just loved it. Len, of course, participated in the dancing and more dancing. The kids loved it. And then obviously telling stories, and you can see how much fun was had. Besides the Gershwin-themed block party, we also remember another outstanding one called Turn of the Century New York, where neighbors came in costume. Our block parties continued to bring in the revenue we needed. Moreover, they were important community events, bringing us all closer. Admittedly, these were big productions that required a lot of volunteer effort. There were other Block Association programming fundraising highlights that we also remember. In 1973, Fred Freed, who lived at 875 West End, presented a slide lecture, How the West Was Won. Fred was a Smithsonian Fellow and New York historian and author, and he told the story of the West Side from 1810 to the present. In 1975, Gretchen Cryer, our well-known neighborhood award-winning theater artist and writer who lives at 885 West End, produced Best of the West. This was a musical showcase that brought together celebrated performers in the neighborhood and on the entire West Side for the benefit of the Block Association. And then in the late 70s, the Block Association also produced a successful cookbook gathering recipes from residents in the neighborhood.
Another equally important community building event that started perhaps 40 years ago is our now famous Halloween parade. Originally, it was a small event so the kids in the neighborhood would have an opportunity to show off their costumes. We seem to recall the Halloween parade was Sherry Tredinari's brainchild. A few tables were set up on West End Avenue between 875 and 865. Members of the Block Association Board handed out donuts and apples. The kids then circled around showing off their costumes. Everyone in costume won a prize. Over the years, as the number of kids grew larger and larger, it was a challenge for the judges to have enough categories so that every child could be recognized. As the event grew, more apples and donuts were needed. People agreed to bake cakes and cookies. Sherry and I spearheaded a crew to assemble packages of treats long before the event itself. Then, along with others such as Mildred Spicer, we sat at a long table distributing the treats so everyone came away with something.
Here's Sherry. We looked and looked for pictures of all the kids in Halloween costume. The only ones we could come up with were those of our son. So here's Jonathan as Peter Pan, getting ready to march around the block.
As we all know, our Halloween party has become one of the signature events of the Block Association. Eventually, 102nd Street was blocked off so more people could mingle and assemble before and after the parade.
As you may have gathered, our beloved friends, Len and Sherry, were mainstays of our neighborhood. Len, who liked to think of himself as the mayor of 103rd Street, knew everyone. Sherry adored this neighborhood and took enormous pride in what she had done to make this area more livable and friendly. The day her sculpture was installed on the median strip of the 106th and Broadway, where it still remains, may have been one of the proudest days of her life. How appropriate it's been that with the Block Association's leadership, a memorial bench on the upper level of Riverside Park near 103rd Street, overlooking our streets, was dedicated in their honor in recognition for all they did for us. The plaque reads, Len and Sherry Tredinari, for what they gave our neighborhood. They loved life, family, friends, food, wine, art, and this park, all traits. And here's a picture of the dedication. If I'm not mistaken, there's Adriana, their daughter, and one of their grandsons, Marco, and I think it's Marco. Okay.
During these beginning years of our Block Association, other Block associations started to form on the Upper West Side. Soon, we were all starting to talk to one another about common issues. As a result, the first steps were taken to form the Area Coalition of Block Associations above 96th Street. We discovered the name Bloomingdale District was used to refer to part of the Upper West Side from 96th Street to 110th Street and bounded on the east by Amsterdam Avenue and Riverside Drive. Its name was a variation of the description given to the area by the Dutch settlers, likely Bloemendaal, a town in the Tulip region. Accordingly, the coalition was named the Bloomingdale Area Coalition, and we started getting more attention from elected officials, city agencies, and the police precinct. As indicated earlier, in the early 70s, when the Block Association was formed, certain streets were really rough. The lower part of 103rd Street between West End and Broadway then had the two of the worst SROs, single room occupancy buildings in the city. The past glory of the Marseille Hotel had deteriorated significantly, and parts of it were burned out. The Alexandria had become a haven for drug dealing and crime. The Block Association was determined to do something about this. Accordingly, when we learned that the West Side Federation for Senior Housing, nicknamed WizFish, might possibly be interested in developing the Marseille into senior housing, we decided to try to help make this happen. WizFish needed funds to engage legal support for this transition. Accordingly, the Block Association committed itself to a grassroots fundraising campaign to help. We organized teams of people to be at the subway each morning and evening, asking for donation towards this effort. People also did this going door to door in their apartment buildings. The funds raised and the support of the Block Association were vital to the eventual successful transformation of the Marseille. Another partnership which has had a significant impact on the Block Association developed when the Linwood Nursing Home at 102nd Street was sold to become the St. Luke's Halfway House, which opened in 1974. Initial nervousness soon abated as the Block Association and the Halfway House worked hard to strengthen our relationship and collaborations. Residents at St. Luke's have been supportive throughout the years of many of our Block Association events.
Over these 50 years, the Block Association has been a constant, despite the transition of many buildings from rental to co-ops, despite the many changes that happen in our neighborhood, despite how often the streetscape on Broadway has changed. When we first came to the neighborhood, on the northwest corner of 103rd Street, for example, Mr. Abalafia had a wonderful flower stand there for many years. Directly across the street, where Subway used to be and where the Purple Circle Nursery School will soon be, there was a coffee shop, the Red Chimney. Where Janovics used to be until recently, there used to be Lampston's, our local 5 and dime store that sold everything. On the West Block between on the West Broadway block between 102nd and 103rd Street, there was a Chinese restaurant, the Harbin Inn. And some of you may recall the fact that the Tredinari's son, Gregory, opened a cheese and pasta store and restaurant where Café du Soleil is now located. On the east side of Broadway, between 103rd Street and 104th Street, was the Edison Theater, a movie theater built in 1913, where for most of its life, it showed second and third run double bills, occasionally first runs. In the late 60s, it showed films with Spanish subtitles, then all Spanish films. It was eventually demolished to build a new apartment building there. On the same block, on the southeast corner of southeast corner of Broadway and 104th Street, now the location of City MDs, is one of the extraordinary architectural treasures of our area. A former Horton-hearted automat, which closed in 1953 and was declared a New York City landmark in 2007. The building's fanciful Art Deco ornamentation was covered over for many years until it was uncovered when City MD moved in. Broadway certainly changed, but the sense of community strengthened in large part because of the Block Association. It's been like our own grassroots government, helping to make the area often seem like a small town. We love knowing that Humphrey Bogart and George Gershwin and the award-winning composer Charles Warrenan lived in this area. And we take pride that Norman Rockwell lived nearby on 103rd Street east of Broadway. But we especially value the Block Association because it's always thinking about our blocks, past, present, and future. We love knowing the architectural history of the buildings surrounding us, but we appreciate the Block Association because it's always making sure our street lamps are working so we can actually see the buildings. We cherish the many ways the Block Association brings us together. Our continuing block parties remain important community events and revenue generators. And yes, they always require a lot of work to organize them. Besides the Halloween parade, another signature event has become the holiday caroling. For nearly 40 years, Anthony Beloff has magnificently led with skill and style our block's annual winter solstice caroling, bringing good holiday cheer and the spirit of a small town life to our neighborhood. Annually, we also celebrate our own rite of spring with our tree well plantings, reminding us all of the beauty of nature and the importance of our trees. All of these activities shape our sense of community, helping strangers become neighbors and friends, and even extended family.
From the start, we wanted our Block Association to be something special. How grateful we are that it is still remains so. It is the spirit of this community that has always made it something special. Thanks to all the people over the years who have led the organization for all of us. And thanks to them and many people who under their leadership have generously volunteered their time and energy, creativity, and support, which have allowed us to get to this special anniversary moment.
One of my favorite books about New York is E.B. White's New York. In it, he says, and I quote, "One of the oft-quoted thumbnail sketch of New York is, of course, it's a wonderful place, but I'd hate to live there." I have an idea that people from villages and small towns, people accustomed to the convenience and friendliness of neighborhood over-the-fence living, are unaware that life in New York follows the neighborhood pattern. The city is literally a composite of tens of thousands of neighborhood units. They are, of course, the big districts and big units, Chelsea, Murray Hill, and Gramercy, which are residential units, Harlem, Greenwich Village, and there is Radio City, Peter Cooper Village, the Medical Center, and many other sections, each of which has some distinguishing characteristic. But the curious thing about New York is that each large geographical unit is composed of countless small neighborhoods. Each neighborhood is virtually self-sufficient. Usually it is no more than 2 or 3 blocks long, with a couple of blocks wide. Each area is a city within a city within the city, end quote. No matter where you live in New York, generally you'll find within a block or 2 or 3, a self-contained city, more or less with its grocery store, newsstand, cleaners, laundry, deli, flower shop, shoe repair, etc., because there's a critical mass who need such services. Yes, we do live in an extraordinary neighborhood, and yes, it's like a small town. Thanks to our 102nd and 103rd Street Block Association for these 50 years. Despite all the changes we've seen and lived through in this area, we've all been woven into the history and tapestry of these blocks, this Bloomingdale area, and the ever-changing magnificent fabric of this great city we think of home. And as we all know, there really is no place like home. And so we raise a glass, you guessed it, of Tread Red, still lovingly made by the Tredenari family.
We salute those who started this Block Association. We celebrate everyone who has worked so hard to help it flourish. We thank all those who have contributed their generosity of coin, time, and spirit to keep it going. We pass on with pride and honor the legacy of these 50 years of the 102nd and 103rd Street Block Association to all those who will follow us in this neighborhood and shape its future. Thank you all.
There's no place like
Like
home.
home.